This video is brought to you by airmodels.net. Hey everyone. So I don't know if you know this about me, but I really like planes. I know I didn't mean to rock your whole world with that. Anyway, very recently, me and my wife took a work trip to Indianapolis, which put me in driving distance of the National Museum of the United States Air Force. And not to out them like this or anything, but they have a shitload of planes. So I took a day to drive over to Dayton in the land of
Ohio
and filmed what I saw there. And I saw some pretty cool stuff. Some stuff I didn't give a shit about, stuff I didn't expect to see, and stuff I didn't even know existed. So join me as we go through my camera roll together. All right, starting off right out front, they have an F-104 Starfighter doing its best to try and fucking land. These things were designed to fly really high and really fast, but turning, yeah, not so much. Its stall speed is very close to its landing speed, about 20 knots difference. They got the nickname the Flying Coffin because this thing would crash on landing more times than you'd want a fighter jet to crash on landing. Now, even before I got into the building, they had a few planes outside on display. First one was an F-15A. Now, in my mind, the F-15 is a huge airframe, but in person and up close, it didn't feel as big as I had imagined. Seeing a lot of these planes in person for the first time and getting a sense of scale was a really interesting perspective. Anyway, down the line, I had some larger frame stuff, starting with the one-of-a-kind NC-13H TIFs, or Total In-Flight Simulator. This thing is basically a C-131, but with an extra cockpit slapped on the front and some extra control surfaces. I believe the intent here was you could program different flight characteristics to simulate a new airframe design. Next to that, we have the EC-15E Aria, or Advanced Range Instrumentation Aircraft. I like to call it Dick Nose. Now, Dick Nose here carries a 7-foot steerable antenna dish that was used as a mobile tracking station for monitoring spaceflight missions, including Apollo. Next to Dick Nose, we have a KC-135 Stratotanker, which is the main workhorse in-air refueler introduced in the late 50s. Side note, in-air refueling is fucking hard. I suck at it. Nothing but respect for the pilots that can pull it off and the boom operators that sit in this little window to top the planes off. After that, we have the iconic C-17 Globemaster. I've actually been in one of these before, which you can see in my airshow video. This boy is the medium cargo aircraft for the U.S. military alongside the C-130 and the C-5. And finally, we have a KC-10 Extender. It's a more modern tanker. Cool thing about this is that it can be refueled in flight by other tankers as well. And that's all they had outside. It was also fucking cold and windy that day, so I headed in. The museum has 4 major hangars, with the technology getting more advanced as you move on. In the first hangar, there was some World War I and World War II stuff. My first little walk around that didn't have much to interest me, if I'm being totally honest. There was an original 1909 Wright Flyer, which is not the first ever plane. That was the 1903, but it's still, pretty neat. They also had an autogyro in this section, which is a really neat aircraft concept. It looks like a helicopter, but the rotor isn't actually powered. It spins passively, and the spin generates lift, similar to like auto rotation landings in helicopters. Since it needs moving air to spin the rotor, it can't sustain a hover, but it's still pretty neat. On the other side of the hangar, there was some World War II shit. They had a B-25, a B-17, a BF-109, and even an ME-262, which is pretty cool. I always think this thing looks like a shark. The most notable plane on this side was the actual boxcar, the B-29 that dropped the second ever nuclear bomb to be used in combat, called Fat Man, on Nagasaki. They had mock-ups of Fat Man and the other new little boy on display as well. Moving on to the next hangar, they had an interesting mix. It was supposed to be Korean and Vietnam era, but there was also some modern stuff mixed in. For example, the very first thing you see as you're entering is an F-22. This is my first time seeing one in person, and the first thing I noticed was how low on the ground it sat. The F-15 outside, I could actually walk under without ducking, and the Raptor was practically a lowrider in comparison. Hanging above that was an experimental stealth aircraft I had actually never heard of before, simply called Bird of Prey. Across the way, there was an MQ-9 Reaper, which again is something I had seen at the air show. This thing was a lightly armed UAV that was used for ISR, light casts, and air interdiction strike. Next to that was its big brother, the RQ-4 Global Hawk. This is my first time ever seeing one of these, and I did not know how large it was. Its wingspan rivals that of like a medium-sized airliner. The Global Hawk is also a UAV, but it has a jet engine rather than a prop like the Reaper or Predator. It also does not carry any weapons and is strictly used for ISR only. There's a B-52 here on display as well, which is also my first time seeing one of those in person. The landing gear on the B-52 is also hilarious to me. It has some big beefy bicycle style landing gear in tandem along the fuselage, and then these little tiny wheels out on the wingtips for balance. It's also one of the oldest aircraft the US still flies, first flying over 70 years ago. Towards the back of the hangar, there was a C-123, which I've actually seen before, but I misidentified as a C-160. Shout out to FPJW Official for the correction in the Airshow videos comments. They also had a few older MiGs, a 17 and a 21, and it's not too surprising that they have those given how old they are. There's also an F4C on display here, but there's a lot more of those in the next section. What was really exciting was the F-111A. This thing put in work during the first Gulf War as a ground attack platform and was the first airplane to feature swing wings that the US used, something that the F-14 and B-1 would also incorporate. It's become a bit of a meme from Non-Credible Defense that this thing is the fucking GOAT, but maintenance was a nightmare. It wasn't the perfect plane that they make it out to be. That being said, it's still very cool. This is the tank killer the A-10 pretends to be. In the same hangar, under the UAVs, they had what they called a full 360 simulator. When I bought the tickets up front, I thought it would be something like this. And I really want to do something like this, so I was super excited to go try it out. Turns out, it's just Ace Combat with a very basic HOTAS setup. But when you roll the plane, this whole fucking pod thing rolls too. And it was kind of cool. It was certainly something I've never done before, but it wasn't the actual sim experience I was looking for. If anyone knows where I can do this kind of shit as a civilian, please let me know in the comments. The next hangar had some truly cool aircraft on display. This is my favorite hangar, hands down. They had models of some of the largest nuclear devices to ever be carried by an aircraft. Like, yeah, this guy looks big, but holy shit. They had a U-2 on display, which I believe is still used in an electronic warfare and mobile data link relay role, although I've heard it's on its way out now. Just below that, they had an SR-71 on display, one of the fastest air-breathing planes to ever fly. This two-crew surveillance jet would fly so high and so fast, no missile or fighter could be able to catch it, or at least in theory. There was a MiG-25 that did manage to catch up and intercept one, but it did not result in a shootdown. Next to the SR-71 was a D-21B, a supersonic drone the SR-71 would carry on its back. And it looks essentially like one of the Blackbird's engines. It's something that I knew existed and had seen in pictures, but wasn't super familiar with. And seeing it here up close and personal was really cool. I dig it. It looks like something that would come off a toy set or Kerbal Space Program. Next to all these spy planes, they had the only B-2 on display in the world. This thing is incredible looking up close in person. The video does not do it justice. It's massive. It dominates the entire hangar. And this hangar has a lot of big planes in it, so that's saying something. Also, side note, a really neat thing they do at this place is they have 3D prints of all the aircraft on display with a braille description next to it for vision impaired visitors so they can still feel the shape of the aircraft, which is a nice touch. I applaud them for that. In front of the B-2, they had some special forces cars, I guess for like CIA operatives or something. I don't know. I'm not a car guy, but it's kind of a neat thing to have on display. Behind the B-2, there was a Thunderbird's F-16A, but also an F-16A cockpit that you could climb in. I've never actually seen an F-16A cockpit before, only the C and the V variants, so I wasn't super familiar with the layout. I do, however, know where the fuck it we ball tastes the fucking sun thought switch is. The next thing that caught my eye was the Bone, or the B-1 bomber. This thing, again, is one of the only swing-wing aircraft the US has ever flown, and while it was envisioned as a strategic bomber, it actually found its job as a close air support platform. It can carry up to 84 500-pound guided bombs. Compare that to the A-10, which in theory could carry probably around 12 to 16. Speaking of the A-10, there was also an A-10A on display. If you've followed the channel, you probably know I'm not the biggest fan of this thing, especially in today's day and age. They did have a cockpit that you couldn't sit in, but you could get up close and take a look at, as well as
the General Electric Gal A8 Avenger, 30mm hydraulically driven 7-barrel rotary autocannon,
extracted from another plane and on display. Next to the Warthog, there was an H-60 Black Hawk II, a helicopter I've actually been in. This guy might be the most famous military helicopter, and depending on who you ask, that could be in a good or a bad context. To many American service members, it's probably saved their lives more than a few times, but it's also the equivalent to the Covenant Phantom to a lot of people around the world. It's a sign of American imperialism, and not in a good way. All that being said, it is a helicopter I really like, and it's even one that I have some experience with. Nearby was one of the largest helicopters the U.S. has ever used, the CH-53 Super Stallion. This guy is used as Marines as a heavy troop transport and heavy lifter for sling loads and internal cargo. The blades and tail can also fold up to help with the limited space on carriers. Right next to that was another Marine Corps aircraft, the V-22 Osprey. Now, on paper, I love this thing. It's basically a C-130 helicopter. It's used in the same way a D-77 Pelican is used in the Halo universe. VTOL aircraft that can transition to forward flight, like the F-35B or the Harrier or the Osprey here, will always have a special place in my heart. And just like the Super Stallion, it too can fold up so it can store in carriers a little bit better. Now, whether it's bad luck or just shark attack style sensationalism, this guy has gotten a lot of bad press. It seems to crash slightly more often than other similar aircraft, but a good amount of Marines have lost their lives in these incidents. I still think it's pretty cool, but the public at large doesn't seem to trust it. Now, next to the Osprey was one of my favorite planes of all time on display, the AC-130. This was an A model, which is a very early version used in Vietnam. The A sports 2 rotary cannons, 2 miniguns, and 2 Bofors cannons. They had a 105mm howitzer cannon on display as well, something later variants would be very well known for. Another cool thing is you could actually look into the rear door and see some of the insides of the birds, including like the TV operator stations. Next to the AC-130 was a GR-1 Tornado, a swing-wing multi-barrel aircraft that was famously used by the UK, but also used by people like Italy and Germany. In the corner, there's an F-15C, which is an updated version of the F-15A I saw outside. They had some munitions on display too. This is the first time I'd seen an AIM-120 in person, as far as I know. I can't help but feel like something's sneaking up on me. Oh, fuck. Yep, F-117 on display, which is pretty cool. I always thought this thing was pretty neat, but after flying it in War Thunder Sim, I found a new appreciation for the Nighthawk. This is definitely my first time seeing this thing in person. I really wanted to touch it, but I didn't. You hear that, Air Force Museum? I didn't touch it. Behind me, I was excited to see yet another F-111, this time an F variant. Never get tired of laying eyes on these guys. This time with some laser-guided bombs. To my surprise, there was a Su-27 and a MiG-29 on display, which these are still pretty modern aircraft compared to like the older MiGs that they showed earlier. And I want to say that there was a point in my life where I couldn't really tell the difference between a MiG-29 and most of the Su model aircraft in a vacuum. Maybe side by side when they're not alone, I could see the difference, but by themselves, I don't know, it's one of them. I'm better at it now. But something that hit me when I saw these two side by side in person was how much bigger the Su-27 was. I always thought they were more around the same size, but it's closer in terms of size difference between like the F-15 and the F-16. They then had 3 different F-4s parked nearby, as well as a bunch of early anti-radiation weapons. They also had a full F-4 cockpit you could climb inside, both the front and rear. I'm not sure on the variant, so if you're an F-4 fanboy, please let me know in the comments if you can recognize what's in my footage here. Really quick, I do want to take a minute to talk to you guys about airmodels.net. If you like military aircraft like me, and let's be honest, if you're watching this, you probably do, then having a nice model to represent your favorite aircraft is easier than ever before. Now, you might hear model aircraft and think you need to glue the whole thing together and paint it up, which sounds like a big hassle, especially if you're not really skilled in that kind of stuff. Well, worry not, hypothetical viewer, because everything from airmodels.net is a metal die-cast piece, which comes assembled and ready to display, other than things like weapons or landing gear, which you can choose to leave on or off and even switch out down the line. And they come fully painted, so you don't need to bust out the airbrush. I'll be leaving affiliate links to a lot of the aircraft I talked about in this video down below, so if you need a nice SR-71 on your shelf, you know where to go. You can help support the channel here by getting yourself something nice. So thanks again to airmodels.net for sponsoring this video. After the Cold War gallery, the next section was a collection of ICBMs. And I know what you're thinking, but that doesn't stand for ice cream bowel movement. Most of this display was closed off because they were shuffling some stuff around. Past that was the 4th and final hangar, which is a mixture of experimental aircraft, spacecraft, and presidential transports. I'll tell you right now, I didn't give a fuck about the presidential stuff. As I entered, I saw a few spacecraft. The most noticeable was a space shuttle replica, kind of, but the closest was a Mercury capsule and an actual Apollo 15 capsule. They also had the X-24A on display, and a Titan 4 stack on its side. Most of the hangar space was dominated by the XB-70, aka the Valkyrie, which is a prototype for a deep penetration hypersonic nuclear bomber. But it was eventually replaced with the iridescent collaborative Black Mambas back in the other hangar. There was a bunch of funky prototypes here too, like this literal VTOL thingy, fucking flying saucer, and parasite fighter that was meant to be launched from and returned to a flying aircraft carrier. They also had a prototype for the Harrier, which was the XV-6A Kestrel. Elon Musk's fucking kid was here too, the YF-12A. Now, they had 3.5 stealth aircraft in this section, one being the first actual stealth aircraft ever made. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you this fucking thing. The Northrop Grumman Tacit Blue, or like Tacit bleh, am I right? Now, while this flying school bus was hit with an ugly stick, you can actually see some of the design elements that carried over into the B2, which was made by the same company. In particular, the ridge that bisects the top and bottom of the airframe, you see that same thing over on the big one. Next to that was the Have Blue, which was an early scale model used for the testing in the proposed radar cross section of the F-117. I think this model is also what's known as the Hopeless Diamond. Some sources are saying it's the same thing, but images of the Hopeless Diamond look different, so let me know what's going on there. And from here, I could see the YF-23 Gray Widow or Black Ghost or whatever, but only from the back, so I walked around to see it from the front. And I'm gonna show you the raw footage of my genuine reaction of what I saw. Yes, I got jump scared by the X-32, Boeing's prototype for the JSF program, and the plane that got absolutely bodied by the F-35 in that competition. Now, apart from this thing's goofy-ass smile, it lost for a few reasons. One, they made two versions of it, one that could go supersonic and one that could VTOL. The VTOL version carried two engines, and its VTOL thrust was more similar to how the Harrier's vertical thrust works, which just wasn't as stable as the F-35's. Funny enough, the F-35 ended up splitting into 3 different versions anyway, but at least it looks cooler than this dumbass thing. Anyway, next to the 32 was one of the only YF-23s ever built, one of 2. I talked about this guy a little bit more in my F-22 video, so if you want to hear more about that, go watch that video after this one. There's a big mock-up of the space shuttle that had what I believed was a sim used by actual astronauts, and behind it was the antagonist from Ace Combat 7, the XO-58, as well as some other small UAVs. When I was ready to go, I stopped in the gift shop because obviously I was so hyped up I needed to spend some money. They ironically had a lot of FA-18 toys and aircraft not used by the Air Force and not even on display in the museum, but, you know, Top Gun. Danger Zone was actually playing on a loop when I went to the gift shop. I considered getting one of these knockoff Lego models, but I decided on a model of an AC-130H, and I ended up going home with that. This is one of those ones you actually have to build and paint, so look for a few build streams once I get moved into my new place. Oh yeah, I'm actually moving to where we ended up going to visit, so I'll be within driving distance of that museum in the near future, so expect me to incorporate it into future videos when they have a plane on display that I'm going to do a video on. Anyway, that's the video. If you enjoyed this video and you want to help the channel, give a like, a comment, subscribe if you haven't, and maybe go watch another video after this. I got a couple. If you want to go above and beyond to help the channel, I have a Patreon where you can see videos early, and I will thank you at the end of videos. And if you want to get yourself something nice too, go ahead and check out airmodels.net. Like I said, I have links down in the description for a bunch of planes that I talked about in this video. I also have a Discord, so you can join my Discord, chat with me in there. I also have an Arma 3 unit if you want to play Arma 3 with me. The Discord for that is linked down in the description. That is Trident Security. I'll also leave a link to the museum if you want to make a donation or something. It is totally free to go there. There is no admission. There is no parking fee. And I recommend you go if you're ever near Dayton, Ohio. God help your soul. That is it for me. So take care.